It's been fun here the last month watching the evolution of the rut. So currently these bucks are in lockdown. There's absolutely no question. Last night we filmed my #1 target buck, Raptor, and he was locked down on a doe out in the middle of the field, cutting her like a racehorse, making sure that he did not lose her to another buck. But I actually started whitetail hunting a month ago in mid-October. And back then, these bucks were still bachelor grouped up. They were starting with their rubs and their scrapes and establishing their territories. And towards the end of October, when Jonathan from Kasco came in, it really started to roll. These bucks started to dominate their area. They started to push the smaller bucks off, and Jonathan had an incredible hunt. We had the red moon come in, we had a cold front come in, we had a little bit of rain that pushed out. And the very first morning, I thought he was going to punch his tag. We were hunting on a new lease farm that we had, and we just set it up. And there was a really good 150-inch buck that we had pretty regular on camera, right on a creek crossing. But based off of how the wind was blowing, he actually had to come in, cross the creek, and cut the trail that the buck ended up coming out on. And this buck came up behind him. And unfortunately, by the time he saw him, the buck saw him or grabbed his wind or where he had entered the stand, and he just eased back, turned, and went back in the brush. But that wasn't going to be the only encounter he had. Later in the week, he rattled in a really good 8-pointer, came screaming in. Now, he heard a buck fight, and as soon as the buck fight broke up, he hit his horns together, and this buck came in. He comes to full draw and decided to let down. It wasn't quite the caliber he was looking for. But the best encounter that he had all week with a buck that we call Sprocket on the river bottom farm. Now this is a deer we had put a food plot in, cleared it out with the veil, set up a rubbing tree. I mean, it was an ideal situation.
I'm feeling pretty good tonight. I'm fired up. Saw a good buck this morning, just couldn't make it happen. Well, he was 25 yards. He came up from the wrong way, the wrong wind, and we didn't spook him, but he just knew something wasn't right. Tonight, we're in a different plot. I sat here yesterday, had a good encounter with a nice 8. And we also had a smaller 8 that went through. Tonight, I'm hoping for a big one.
Instead of following the does into the plot, he comes in under their tree stand, scent checks the does, and walks straight away. And Jonathan, to his credit, he did not try to force a shot, because a lot of guys, they would have tried to grunt, stop him, or try that really steep corner away shot, and Jonathan let him walk away. And with that, a pretty big deer walked through his shooting lane that he never got an opportunity on. The week ended, so unfortunately he didn't punch his tag, but he had a great time. And during that period, these bucks were hammering the scrapes, hammering the licking branches, and starting to bump the does. A lot of the younger bucks were pushing does at this time, and the older deer were establishing their territories. It's like they knew the does weren't coming in yet, and they were there just pretty much to establish their dominance. So Jonathan leaves. I had a really good encounter that week with a buck that we called Ronald, and I rattled Ronald in. And I knew right away he's coming in. He's 6.5-year-old deer. We have sheds of him the last couple years. Kind of goofy antlered, but the perfect deer for Joe Umphries, who was coming in on the heels of Jonathan leaving. So I rattled this buck in. He comes right through my shooting window, but it was good to get eyes on him. So now Ronald's in trouble. So Joe comes in, and unfortunately, due to his work schedule and all the traveling he has to do as a brand manager for Big Tine, he only could give me 3 days. Well, on the morning of the 3rd day, he rattles in Ronald. Here comes Ronald right down the creek, 180 degrees different direction from when I rattled him in. So he was working this ditch east and west. And Ronald presented him with an incredible 25-yard shot, and Joe put the arrow right through the heart of Ronald.
Dude, he just piled up right there, didn't he? He's dead.
Is that most unique? We had a good week, though.
It's been a great week.
You know, despite the warmer temperatures, these deer are definitely on the rut patterns right now. great shot, great encounter, great 6.5-year-old deer. Was thrilled that Joe punched his tag. My oldest daughter, Sydney, was in town at the same time.
So this is the second day of my hunt so far in Illinois. I just got out here yesterday for the week. I haven't been out here yet, so this is really exciting. I'm sitting in a spot where we killed 2 deer last year, and we have some great inventory this year on the farm in this spot, so I'm really excited and hopefully can get a potential buckshot, and if not, hopefully get a doe.
Lots of younger deer, lots of sparring going on, but not that peak of the rut you were hoping for. She did see Trigger, which is a 4.5-year-old up-and-comer, framed a lot like Lucky, shorter G2 tines, long main beams, and he put on a show. And to Sydney's credit, you know, she wants to shoot a good deer. And I said, hey, hon, you make this decision. You decide what deer you want to shoot. And she said, hey, Dad, I want this deer to roll another year. So she focused her efforts on other bucks. And unfortunately, she didn't fill her tag either. At this point, Sydney goes home, Joe Umphries goes home, Nick Fisher from AAE. He comes in. Ready to chase some whitetails this week?
Yeah.
The night before Nick Fisher comes in, I have an incredible encounter with Rover. He's living right where he should be. We did the big timber project. We created the habitat. We felled a bunch of trees, left the treetops, and the cameras told us where Rover was living. And he came out, and I'm still on the fence on Rover because he went back 10 inches. 7.5-year-old buck, 25 yards. And he's just running doe, cutting the doe, in and out of the timber. And I enjoyed the experience so much that I was happy just letting Rover go at this point. But he's on my radar because I'm trying to find this buck Raptor because he's a bigger deer, same age class. So I'm all excited because now the rut's peaking, right? These bucks, you can rattle them in, you can decoy them, you can grunt them. We're hitting that November, 2nd, November 4th time frame. Nick Fisher comes in, and I mean, he must be a buck magnet. Unbelievable. Second day out, sitting on the river bottom farm, we had a buck we called the banana bean buck. We had him in velvet. We had him go hard horn. He'd disappear for a week or so and come back on camera. And there were some other good bucks in there. We have Mr. Beast who's in there. We had Sprocket, obviously, that Jonathan didn't get a shot off on. So that whole inventory sitting there. Plus, I had that big tall brow tine buck that I rattled in when Jonathan was here. And I rattled him in to 25 yards. And I decided to pass, and he's a fully mature deer. I mean, 250, 300 pounds on the hoof. And with that inventory, I mentioned to Nick, I said, put the decoy out. Put the decoy out, because these bucks, if you're gonna pull them over this ocean of grass, they need this focal point. He slips in there early, goes across the creek, goes into a stand through this, really cool access trail that's in this river bottom, big steep wall drainage. So deer can't see you, climbs in a stand, puts a decoy out, and about 9 o'clock in the morning, sees this 8-pointer way in the distance, and he just hits it with a little snort, wheeze, and a grunt just to get his attention, and in comes the banana bean buck from the west. And he was marching straight. I mean, he obviously locked onto this decoy.
Freaking giant deer. Monster. I'd only hope I get another shot at a deer like that.
Now, Nick is an incredible shot. He helped dial my bow in. We got everything tuned in. I mean, Nick could thread a lifesaver at 70 yards. And but he's a Western hunter. Elk, mule deer, antelope, got a whole wall full of them. Never hunted whitetails before. So in comes a 180-inch whitetail. And he gave him all this time, coming across the grass, decoys at 20 yards. And Nick knows, what the distance is. This deer stops. He's guessing it now because he was already at full draw at like 50 or 60 yards. And he guessed a deer for 36. The deer's probably about 30, which would have killed him, but the deer ducked his arrow. And what a heartbreaking moment to duck an arrow on a 180-inch deer for a guy who's never hunted whitetails, to see the mecca of all whitetails. So he sprints off in the distance. Next day, 3-beam shows up on camera, regular, hitting the scrapes, hitting the scrapes, hitting the scrapes. You got to go after him, 6.5-year-old bully buck. He had him at 50 yards and chose not to shoot. He's hoping he's going to come in a little closer. And again, he can make their shot all day long. I respect him for that. These deer can move fast. Last night, we say, Jonathan had hunted there before, and Nick obviously had an encounter with 3-beam, so he said, okay, go back in after 3-beam. He comes out at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, there he is. He just came into the... Right there. He's coming in. He's coming in.
He's just going wild. He's hitting a scrape. He's pushing a buck off. He's running a doe. Like, he is just fired up rut. Now, this is that time period, right? This is 10th or 12th of November. This is the peak, right before the breeding is really going to take off. So he wants every single doe to himself. He comes in, looks around, runs all these other bucks off, and decides to take a bite of corn. Just that small moment, he's 38 yards. And by this time, Nick is just fired up. I mean, he's just watched this buck for, I don't know, 20 minutes, and comes to full draw and just chooses the wrong pin. Shoots under the deer because he has a 2-pin sight. One was at 23, one was at 38, deer's at 38. And in the heat of the moment of getting that shot off, and it, you can see the arrow fly true, just wrong pin. Oh my goodness. So unfortunately, he went home without filling a tag, but of all the hunters we've had in the recent years here on the farm in Illinois, he had the most big buck activity. So now we're into lockdown. We're in that pivotal phase. We're just waiting for these deer to break off their does, get towards that time period when they're going to start running for these does again and try to harvest our buck here before gun season starts.